Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wilson. Well, welcome to our summer solo series. If you've been listening for a while, you may remember that I did this series last summer, and I'm really excited to bring it back. Throughout the summer, I'll be sharing shorter, information-packed episodes that are really inspired by the questions and conversations I've been having with parents, educators, and other listeners. So these aren't typical Q&A episodes. Instead, I'll be talking about common concerns and topics that come up time and time again, and diving a little deeper into the research, the practical strategies, and what they mean for the children that we support. Today, I'm talking about screen use, which can get tricky during the summer months, and I'm recording this during the summer. During the school year, there's usually at least some built-in structure. There are routines, there are activities, there are schedules. But during the summer, many children, especially tweens and teens, suddenly have hours of unstructured time, increased independence, and much more access to devices. And for many families, screens slowly become the default. A little YouTube turns into hours, gaming stretches later into the night, social media use increases, and sleep schedules shift. Kids become more irritable, less motivated, more emotionally reactive, or more withdrawn. And so these are things to really pay attention to. Parents often find themselves stuck between wanting to set limits and wanting to avoid constant battles. And we have talked about this on the podcast before. But what's important is this. As all of you know, the conversations around screens have changed dramatically over the last several years, and we have talked about that on this podcast. This is simply no longer a conversation about watching too much TV, which is the conversation when I was a kid. We're now talking about highly personalized algorithms, endless scrolling, dopamine-driven engagement systems, social comparison, gaming ecosystems, AI chatbots, and platforms specifically engineered to keep children engaged for as long as possible. What you may be noticing is that researchers, educators, pediatricians, psychologists, and policymakers are sounding the alarm. In 2026, the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory described harmful screen use among children and adolescents as an emerging public health concern. And this is not new for people who've been following this. So today, I want to talk about what the newest research is showing, why recommendations and policies are beginning to shift, why tweens and teens are especially vulnerable, and most importantly, how parents can approach screens during the summer in a realistic, balanced, evidence-informed way. Not through fear, not through shame, and definitely not through perfection, because screens are not going away. But childhood still matters, development still matters, mental health absolutely matters, and relationships matter. One of the biggest misconceptions about screen use is that the use is simply the number of hours children spend online. And people ask that, how much time does your child spend online? But one of the most important shifts happening in the research is what experts are increasingly realizing the issue is much more complicated than screen time. The newer conversation is not about quantity. It's about context. It's about content, timing, developmental stage, and what screens are replacing. And that last one is such an important one. For example, if a child spends an hour communicating with cousins on Snapchat, or creating digital art, coding, or researching a passion project, that is very different from spending 4 hours passively scrolling through algorithm-driven videos designed to maximize attention and emotional reactivity. And that distinction matters. A recent Surgeon General's advisory specifically highlighted features like infinite scroll, autoplay, streaks, reward systems, and algorithm feeds that are intentionally designed to increase engagement and prolong use. And this is important for parents to understand. Many children are not simply lacking discipline or motivation. They are interacting with systems intentionally designed to capture attention. That changes the conversation. Because for years, parents were often made to feel like this was purely a parenting issue. And I really want parents to hear that. Newer research about persuasive technology engagement-based design is showing us that many platforms are deliberately built to exploit developing brains. And developing brains are particularly vulnerable, especially teens and tweens, teen and tween brains, and neurodivergent brains. During adolescence, the brain's reward systems are highly active, while parts of the brain's responsible for impulse control, long-term planning, emotional regulation, and decision-making are still developing. That means adolescents are biologically more sensitive to novelty, social feedback, peer approval, reward-driven behavior, and emotional intensity. That makes modern digital environments incredibly powerful. And that becomes especially important during the summer when structure decreases. Because when children are bored, when they're lonely, when they're stressed, when they're socially anxious, emotionally overwhelmed, or understimulated, screens quickly become the easiest form of escape, the easiest form of stimulation or regulation. And over time, those things begin replacing experiences children desperately need for healthy development. Things like face-to-face interaction, physical movement, creative play, boredom tolerance. Yes, kids need to be able to tolerate boredom. It's replacing problem solving, independence, sleep, and real-world emotional coping. And I really want to pause on boredom. I'm going to go back to boredom for a moment because I think boredom has become one of the most misunderstood developmental experiences in modern parenting. Children need some boredom. Children need some boredom. So if your kids are saying, I'm bored, we really need to take a look at that. Not overwhelming boredom, not neglect, space. Kids need space to think, space to create, space to initiate, space to tolerate discomfort without immediately escaping into stimulation from screens. Because boredom often precedes creativity. It precedes imagination. It precedes self-directed behavior. And when every uncomfortable or quiet moment is instantly filled with digital stimulation, children have fewer opportunities to develop internal coping system. And that matters a great deal for executive functioning development. I was just talking to a parent the other day about not only accommodating executive functioning struggles, but building skills in executive functioning. And summer is a great time to do that. So I want to say something important here. We have to avoid oversimplifying the youth mental health crisis. We have to stop blaming screens for everything. The reality is that children today are dealing with enormous pressures: academic stress, social comparison, sleep deprivation, performance pressure, isolation, exposure to distressing content, and for many children, especially neurodivergent children, daily life can already feel very overwhelming. So screens are not the sole cause of mental health challenges. But what we're finding is that screens act as an amplifier. And some of the new research is really concerning. It is showing a link between excessive screen use and anxiety, depression, body image concerns, sleep deprivation, attention difficulties, poor academic outcomes, and social emotional challenges in children and adolescents. In fact, there was a large 2026 study recently published in JAMA Network Open, and they found that pediatric anxiety-related visits to the doctors increased by more than 250% over the last 10 years. Now, again, that does not mean that screens alone caused this increase. Many researchers believe social media and digital environments are contributing factors, especially when children are exposed to constant comparison, cyberbullying, unrealistic standards, distressing content, and chronic overstimulation. That Surgeon General's report that I mentioned also noted that nearly half of adolescents report losing track of how much time they're spending on their phones. And honestly, many adults probably relate to that too. But what's also interesting is that we're beginning to see a broader cultural shift happening. Schools and policymakers are starting to rethink technology use as well. For years, there was this assumption that more technology in schools automatically meant better learning. And what we're finding is that there are now growing concerns about attention and distraction and mental health that are causing many educators and policymakers to reassess that assumption. We know that in Los Angeles, one of the largest school districts are now implementing or considering stricter limitations on screen use and cell phone access during the school day. And that's happening across the country and across the world. And one reason for the shift is that schools are recognizing how difficult sustained attention has become for many students. Teachers are reporting more distractibility, more multitasking, more difficulty with frustration tolerance, and more challenges with sustained reading and deep thinking. And again, this is really nuanced. Technology can absolutely support learning. There are wonderful educational tools, many I recommend myself. There are incredible accessibility benefits. Technology can be especially valuable for neurodivergent learners, but more technology is not automatically better. And I think we're finally moving toward a more developmentally informed conversation. So let's talk about what parents can actually do this summer with all of this information that we now have that is continuing to develop. Because this episode, again, like I said at the beginning, is not about perfection. It's about intentionality. And honestly, one of the biggest mistakes parents make is focusing only on restriction. Children need replacement experiences. You can't just say, I'm going to put a timer on your phone and after that, figure out what you're going to do next. We can't simply remove screens without addressing what children actually need developmentally, emotionally, socially, and physically. And if we don't take those things into consideration, the plan usually just falls apart. So here are some evidence-informed strategies that can genuinely help. First, create anchors in the day. Children do better with predictable rhythms and routines. That might mean no phones before breakfast, movement before gaming, screen-free family meals, or devices charging outside bedrooms overnight. And honestly, removing devices from bedrooms overnight may be one of the highest impact changes families can make because sleep and screens are deeply connected. Recent research shows a strong connection between excessive screen use and poor sleep quality in children and adolescents. And poor sleep impacts attention, emotion regulation, learning, mental health, motivation, and behavior. And I've talked about the importance of sleep on this podcast before, and it's particularly important during those summer months. Second, focus on active versus passive screen use. Not all screen time is equal. Creating, coding, communicating, researching, or learning a skill online is different from endless passive scrolling, which means you're going to have to take a look at what your kids are doing on their screen. That also doesn't mean passive entertainment is always bad. Children deserve downtime, they deserve fun, they deserve relaxation, but balance matters. Third, expect pushback. This is important. When highly stimulating digital input decreases, many children initially become more irritable, more restless, we're bored. That does not necessarily mean limits are harmful. Sometimes it means the nervous system is recalibrating. And parents often give up too quickly because they assume discomfort means something is wrong. But temporary discomfort is often part of adjustment. So really take that into consideration. Remember what I said about boredom earlier. It's a good thing. Fourth, this is what we need to do. We need to model healthy behavior. And honestly, this is probably the hardest one for adults because children notice everything. If we are constantly distracted by our own devices while telling children to get off theirs, the message becomes really confusing. Children need to experience adults who are emotionally present, who make eye contact, who tolerate quiet moments, who engage in conversations without constantly checking their own notifications. And I say this with compassion, not judgment, because this is difficult for me. It is difficult for all of us. These platforms are affecting adults too. Fifth, build more real-world experiences into summer. Children need movement. They need sunlight. They need social interaction. That may mean hosting play dates. They need creativity, mastery, and opportunities to feel competent offline. And this doesn't have to be expensive. It can be walking trails, hiking, basketball at the park, libraries, volunteering, cooking, art, music, board games, bike rides. Tons of community programs are available. Or simply spending more time with extended family and friends. And especially for tweens and teens, involvement matters. Children are more likely to reduce screen time when they have meaningful alternatives. Now, I want to acknowledge that this conversation can become especially complicated for households with neurodivergent children. For some autistic children, online spaces may provide genuine social connection and emotional safety. For children with ADHD, screens can provide stimulation and novelty that their brains naturally seek. For anxious children, screens may temporarily reduce stress or social discomfort. And for gifted children, digital spaces can provide intellectual engagement and creativity. So it's important that I say that it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. It's not a one-size-fits-all conversation. And again, the goal is not eliminating screens. The goal is paying attention to functioning. Are screens replacing sleep, replacing movement, relationships, responsibilities, emotional coping? Are they replacing real-world experiences and independent functioning? Or are they supporting connection, creativity, learning within balanced limits? And that distinction really matters. And everyone has to take that into consideration for themselves and figure out what's going on in their own household. I want to leave parents with this thought. I think one of the biggest misconceptions in this conversation is that parents need to choose between being anti-technology or completely permissive. And that's really not a real choice. The real question is, are we helping children develop healthy relationships with technology while also protecting the developmental experiences that they need? Because children still need, like I said, sleep, movement, boredom, face-to-face interaction, creativity, independence, frustration tolerance, and opportunities to build identity outside of algorithms designed to hold their attention. And during the summer months when structure naturally decreases, intentionality becomes even more important. Not perfection, not shame, and not fear. Just more awareness, more balance, and more opportunities for our children and teens to experience life beyond the screen. Thank you so much for listening. And if this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with another parent, educator, or caregiver who may also be navigating this challenge. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.